Hello and welcome to episode 37 of Knitter Matters. Thank you very much for joining us, whether you're watching live or the replay afterwards. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you. My name is Cheryl. I'm an image consultant. My company is Style Matters International. And throughout my life, I've had two passions, sewing and knitting. And knitting in particular is the thing that I do every day as my relaxation and my therapy. I used to also be the owner of a yarn shop in Brighton, England, and one of the great joys of owning a yarn store is that you get to teach people how to knit. And it's a joy all these years later to be able to teach you how to knit, albeit on a different platform. Please feel free to write in any comments on the thread below or any questions. While we're actually doing the Facebook Live, I can't see the questions. I can sometimes see your names pop up. Oh, and I can see Peggy Ann Bent has popped up. Hi Peggy, nice to see you. So I'll try and give you a shout out if I see your name. But as for questions, I'll get back to them as soon as possible afterwards. Okay, I'm going to ask the camera to turn to the worktop and we're going to start because it's December and it's time for some fun and festive knits. To start off, I just want to show you this book. This was given to me several years ago by a wonderful friend, Angela Newson, that's you, in the UK. It makes me smile every time I look at it. You can knit your own nativity. And there are 16, for those of you that like to do small projects, there are 16 knitted projects, including shepherds and donkeys and wise men, all sorts of fun things to do. Even at the back, and when you want to stage your nativity scene, there's even a pull-out backdrop that you can set up and a manger that you can set up as well. I've just got to open this so the camera can see it. I will post the link to that book afterwards in case it's of interest to you, but it's one of those fun things. Although I haven't knitted all the characters, it's one of those fun things that I keep in my library and I love it and it makes me smile every time I see it. So searching through archives of my store and patterns that we used to have, I came across these cards, which they're actually very precious to me. They're over 30 years old. They're very special to me as they were handmade by my parents. Dad did the artwork by hand and Mum did the knitted bits. And of course, my dad being my dad and the perfectionist that he was, he did two options for the snowmen, the hat and cane or the top hat and silver top cane. And I sent these out to my customers and we would also sell them in the store. And this one, my mother knitted the dozens and dozens of little stockings, and the idea was, although this feathery trim is now looking a bit sad and yellowed and flattened, of course that was much fluffier and lush 30 years ago, but the idea remains the same. What we had a little wrap present that could poke in the top, or peppermint sticks, something like that. I've even got my mother's handwritten instructions. Oh, Maureen Wells, hi, thank you for joining us. I've even got my mother's handwritten instructions for these little stockings, which I will get written up and post on the page within a day or two, or hopefully this afternoon, but I will certainly put those there. And these cards to me are as precious as family recipes. And just like old family recipes, the idea is still good. You can tweak them and make them your own. I'm sorry. Today I've got to work in a tight place today because the cameraman tells me my hands get in the way, so I'm really trying not to do that. Anyway, you could certainly make your own cards. You could also just make the knitted trims if you wanted to. These are so flat now, they've been in storage, look at that. But you could make the little scarves, you could make little stockings. You could trim your cards, you could use them, almost tie them on as gift tags. You could do the scarf or the stocking in stripes or a family member's favourite colours, hang them from your tree, whatever. In fact, downstairs we have a shelf of interesting types of gin, and I was given some years ago some little furry stoles and knitted scarves to put around the necks of the bottles. That would be a perfect thing to do, just to add some more decorations. Tristan Ziegler, thank you for joining us. Really nice to see you pop up. Hi. So that was a little trip down memory lane, but the point I'm trying to make is just because they're old ideas, it doesn't mean to say they're not good ideas. And just as I say, like a family recipe, you can tweak them and make them your own. So I'm just going to move these out the way now. So last week I posted my pattern for making holly leaves and berries. That pattern is on the page. Single ones here, and I did a whole bunch more berries, which I've got to just finish off. Do recommend that you leave the ends. I just worked in the end where you finish it, but I kept the tails where I actually cast on, where I cast on. So those are going to be useful in a while. But I also made some pine cones. Now the pine cones are from a free pattern from Ravelry, from Frankie Brown. It's called Woodland Wreath. This is one of several pages. She's done a woodland wreath, but I used her pine cone, I nearly said recipe then, her pine cone instructions, and I will post a link to this pattern afterwards. It is a free pattern. There's lots of things that you can knit on there, lots of different leaves, but I picked it for the pine cones, and I'll post the link to that afterwards. So for this I used, let me get a little mat so you can see it more clearly. So I used yarns all from Mary Maxim here, and these were the pine cones. They're all worsted weight yarn, so kind of a double knitting-ish yarn. I particularly like this Woodlands yarn. Interestingly, it's the same name as the pattern, but there's no connection there. But the Woodlands yarn, which we used before when we did the sampler Afghan, it's acrylic and alpaca, and I particularly like the fact that these little silvery kind of wisps of the alpaca, they made the pine cone look sort of nicely grainy, you know, that little sort of woody grain, and it gives it a sort of silvery touch, which I really like for the pine cones. The pattern is very easy. There's two sizes of pine cones, although I have to say I didn't find much difference. This is the larger one, this is the smaller one, but you could do it on a finer yarn or a smaller needle to bring it down a size if you wanted to just make that difference a bit more obvious. So the pattern, I'm not going to go through the whole pattern because it's very simple, but you basically cast on the number of stitches that it says to do. For the bigger cone, it's 48 stitches. And then you basically knit. I'm going to show you two different versions in a minute. You just knit so many stitches, then you turn, go back, you knit, you turn, you knit. So you're creating the sort of short row effect. And I'm going to show you what we do this in a minute. But you don't have to worry about wrapping the stitch when you turn. You'll get a little kind of bump or a little hole. It's not going to matter. It's a pine cone. It's not going to be seen. On a garment, you wouldn't want that. And we wrap the stitch as we've done in a previous episode of Knit Matters. But you don't have to worry about any of that now. But what you do when you've done the rows, the amount that it says, you then finish off with a picot edging. And I'm going to show you that edging. We have done a picot edging before in episode, what did we do it in? Episode, oh, can't remember. It'll come back to me. Oh, yeah, can't remember. Anyway, episode 25, that's right, in our Get the Edge. So I have done here all my rows, and I've done my turns, and I'm ending up with my purl side facing, which is what I want. I have cut my yarn because I'm going to show you how to do this in a lighter colour, just so you can see. But you wouldn't do this. I'm just going to knot this. You could do this actually if you wanted a slightly lighter shade, so you wanted to almost make that sort of slightly silvery tone that pine cones have. Okay, so what we do here, we actually, get these out of the way. So this takes the longer than actually knitting the whole pine cone, but you have to do it because it really finishes it off. So we're going to cast on 2 stitches, and we'll do that with a cable cast on, which if you remember is going through the 2 stitches and pulling the yarn through. Now I'm going to cast off 3 stitches. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now I'm going to cast on again 2 stitches. 1. Oh, I've caught my yarn. And 2. I've split my yarn there. Now I'm going to cast off 4 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4. And you repeat that. I cast on 2 stitches. 1, 2. I cast off 3. I cast on another 2. And I cast off 4, and so on and so on. And I do that across the length of the entire row. Okay, so that's what you'll end up with, this little Picot edge, that textured edge. So let me take you back to the piece that I have done, and I'll show you how to stitch it up, because it doesn't look much like a pine cone here. This is all one colour, and I did it this colour so it was easier to see. Is it actually easier if I put it on the black here? Yeah, I'm going to ask him the camera. So what you do now, you would weave in, or just finish off your ends, your cast on and your cast off end, which would be over there. Then you get a length of yarn on a yarn needle or bodkin, and you want to fasten it to the widest end of your pine cone. Okay, I'm just going to do a little knot there so it doesn't slip out. Now what you do, and you're working with the knit side outside, so that's facing you. So you're going to be rolling this up as you go, and you're going to just be stitching on the cast on edge. You're tightly rolling this, and you're stitching, my end out the way, you're stitching this as you go, and you're stitching on the cast off edge, and you want to keep that cast off edge even. So I'm sort of rolling it, get that out the way, I'm rolling it. You're just really over sewing it. It doesn't have to be neat stitches, you're just holding it. Rolling, rolling and holding, if you will, as you go. And maybe a good thing is to knit several of them, and then you can do the sort of stitching all in one go. So you're making a spiral. As you go. And I've just done this in a lighter colour so you can see the whole thing. So you're just sewing that up. And you're thinking, oh, that doesn't look much like a pine cone. But it sort of does by the time you get here. So by the time you've finished that, your pine cone, what you want, these edges are now sort of curling out. Now it's a bit sort of long and pointy. If you want it slightly squatter, and this is what I did with mine, just put your needle right up the centre, and then I sort of caught that top edge of mine, put the needle back down, and you kind of pull it, and then you've got a nice sort of fat squat pine cone. And by the time that's splayed out, it's much more realistic looking, and certainly when you do it in a darker colour it's better. But that's your pine cone, super easy, and it's the same principle for the small one as it is for the larger one. So I'm going to show you now what I did with all those pine cones, and I'm going to get the mats out here because you need to be able to see this. So just forgive me 1 second while I spread these out a bit, because I want you to see. Okay, let's stick another one over there. Have we got enough? Will you be able to see, do you think? Sorry, I'm talking to my cameraman here. Bit of movement here. That's the only thing. Here we go. Right. So what did I do with all those knitted holly leaves and pine cones? Well, this is what I did. This is my knitted wreath. Tell me if you could. Yep, perfect. Okay. So what I did here is I purchased a 12-inch twig wreath, for want of a better word. It's not completely filled because I wanted to show you what to do. So I just purchased a 12-inch wreath, very inexpensively. Now you could certainly use a wire wreath. There are styrofoam wreaths available, but I didn't like those for this purpose because they're actually quite hard. So I'd have to cover it first with something because it's pretty ugly. The polystyrene showing through is pretty ugly. So I'd have to cover it or fill every gap. So I really didn't like that. But I love the idea of these, these twigs kind of just poking through and popping out. I like its organicness. Is that a word, organicness? Anyway, I like its organic nature. And you can put as many holly leaves and pine cones on as you want. You can add some little white berries if you want for mistletoe. I also added my mum's little stockings here. You could embroider the initials of your grandchildren or family members or children on if you wanted to. So you can really personalize it. But let me show you how I fixed on my pine cones and my holly. So there's a couple of ways you can do this. I'm going to turn this so I can work on this side. Okay. There's a few ways you could do this. You could either use some florist wire and cut that. That worked quite well. And if you wanted to make your holly leaves a bit more, fixed or a bit stiffer in places, you could just weave some of this through sort of the spine of your holly leaf, if you like, that where we've got that little indentation or that little stitch there. You could weave that through and then you can tweak them, a bit like wired ribbon, if you will. So you can do it like that. I actually found it a whole lot easier to just sew my ends in, really. So what I did, that's why these are important to hang on to these. Now you can do this with a hook or fingers. I found it a little less abrasive on the fingers to just thread my needle and kind of decide where I want to place it. So before I actually started fixing them, I went round and kind of, where do I want these to go? I would sort of just held them on there and then went back and stitched or fixed them on. So let's say I want this one here. Maybe I'll put that round so they've got some holly leaves poking out that way. So I'm just going to, camera can't see, but let me lift this up. So literally all I'm doing is kind of going through with my needle and coming out the other side. There. Let me do the same with this piece, this length. If you prefer, as I say, you can wire them in. Just use some florist wire. But I would keep the ends of your knitting on. And then, again, I can just poke down to where that's going to come out at the back. And now I can just tie that on like that. Okay. If I wanted to, I could sort of, decide where I want them. But again, I like the sort of floppiness of them. It's supposed to be a wreath. It's supposed to be holly leaves. They don't always grow in the direction you want them to. So you can play with that. But you don't need to do a lot. You just need to poke those ends through and tie them in some way. And I found that when I started doing it, I was wiring them on, I was putting loads of wire in, then I thought, why? They're not going to move around. So again, same thing with my pine cones. I'm just going to jab that through there. And obviously I'm going to have to put a few more leaves on and berries, but I wanted to show leave a gap so you could see what I was doing. So that one came out there, and I'm just going to go through there, pull my yarn through, and again I can just tie those. Sorry, I've got to lift this up to do it. Tie those. Nobody's going to see the back. There we go. And then you can trim those off. Once you're sure that they're in the right place, you can trim those off. And then kind of finagle them the way that you want them to. You could I put a ribbon on mine. You could hang it from a door hanger, whatever you want to do. I've got to do a few more, but I'm still going to leave it so you can see quite a few of the twigs. I don't want to completely cover it. I just like that openness of it. So it's a fun thing to do with your holly leaves and your pine cones. Okay. So I hope you like my holly wreath. I do suggest that you take a look at the Mary Maxim site. They have lots of really fun, interesting little Christmas ornaments and baubles to make, whether you're a knitter, a crocheter or a sewer. And don't forget that our friends there, if you put in the promo code Cheryl, you get 20% off one item, which would be the highest price item in the cart, but you must use the promo code Cheryl at checkout. But do have a look at this site. It's some really fun things. It's very tempting. I've already got quite a lot of projects on the go, but when I had a look earlier today, it was like, oh, there's even more than there were yesterday. Okay, I'm going to ask the camera to come back up to me. I was very excited to be featured in an online article by a website called Create Whimsy that focuses on artists and fibre arts and all sorts of wonderful things. There's a link to that on the Knitter Matters page if you want to take a look at that and read it. I do hope you enjoy it. It talks about my journey in knitting. So it was a pleasure to be interviewed by them, and I hope you enjoy the article. So as always, this episode and every other episode of Knitter Matters is posted to our page. It's also uploaded to our YouTube channel. We're on Instagram as well. So do like, follow and share. Amongst other knitters. This is for knitters, this page. This whole series is for knitters, so we want knitters to enjoy it. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to let me know. Oh, on one thing, when I post things, yes, when I post patterns and things like that, I've had a couple of people saying, can I post it as a PDF? Well, I would love to be able to post it as a PDF, but because of the nature of the Facebook page we have, Facebook doesn't allow me to do that. You have to have a different type of page. You have to have a group page to be able to post a PDF. If I was to post a PDF of the patterns that I've talked about today on our page, when you look at it, it comes out like a long menu. You wouldn't really be able to print it off. It's just the way that Facebook works. But I post them as a JPEG, so you can certainly print those off or download them. But if you really need it as a PDF, if you direct message me or private message me with your email address, I'll be happy to send it to you. So that's why I can't post them as a PDF. It would be easier if I could, but I can't currently do that. Okay. So anyway, between now and next week, it's December, it's Christmas, so it's festive time. Between now and next week, do stay well, stay safe, stay knitting, and I'll see you next week. Bye for now.